You know that moment when someone asks how you're doing, and a certain type of person just shrugs, pours another cup of coffee, and says, "I'm good, just busy." It happens in quiet places. A man sitting in his truck outside a grocery store after work. A woman rinsing dishes at the kitchen sink while the house finally goes quiet. Someone staring at their phone, typing a message, then deleting it. And the strange part is, they almost never talk about what they're actually carrying. If you grew up around Generation X, you've probably seen this. A whole generation that learned how to keep going without making a scene about it. So why do some people, especially those born between the mid-60s and early 80s, have this habit of staying silent about their struggles? Why do they keep things to themselves, even when life gets heavy? Because by the end of this video, you might recognize which pattern feels familiar to you. And once you see it, a lot of things about how people cope with life suddenly make more sense. Now first, this isn't about right or wrong. Some people talk things out. Some people process quietly. Usually it has less to do with personality and more to do with what the brain learned early about safety, trust, and survival. And for Generation X, the environment they grew up in shaped those lessons in very specific ways. The first pattern is what you might call the quiet protector. Picture an afternoon in 1978. An 8-year-old lets himself into an empty house after school. The key hangs on a string around his neck. He drops his backpack, makes a peanut butter sandwich, and turns on the TV while the sun slowly disappears outside the window. No parents home yet. No phone to call. Just silence. Kids in that era did this every day. They were the famous latchkey kids. Psychologically, something interesting happened in that environment. When you solve problems alone long enough, your brain starts to associate independence with safety. You learn early that emotions are something you handle privately. So later in life, when stress shows up, job loss, family pressure, financial worries, the instinct isn't to broadcast it, it's to contain it. People like this might say things like, "I'll figure it out. Don't worry about me." To outsiders, it can look like emotional distance, but often it's just an adaptation, not broken, just trained to carry weight quietly. Then there's another group. You might call them the realists. Imagine a teenager in the late 1980s watching the evening news. Factories closing, layoffs spreading through neighborhoods, parents whispering about bills after dinner. Many Gen X kids watched adults who worked hard and still saw stability disappear overnight. So their brains absorbed a quiet lesson. Nothing is guaranteed. When people grow up with that message, they develop what psychologists sometimes call defensive realism. They hope for good things, but they're also prepared for the rug to move. That mindset often shows up in the way they talk about problems. They rarely dramatize them. Instead, you hear things like, "Life's rough sometimes. It'll pass." And strangely enough, staying silent about struggles can come from practical thinking, not emotional suppression. Talking about the problem doesn't fix it. So their instinct is simple. Handle what you can. Keep moving. For many of them, silence isn't avoidance. It's efficiency. Or as someone once put it, complaining doesn't repair the engine. But there's a third pattern that shows up in Generation X. And this one is a little different. You could call it the bridge builder. Think about the strange timeline this generation lived through. They grew up in an analog world. Libraries with card catalogs, bikes with grease-covered chains. Saturday afternoons spent fixing things instead of Googling answers. Then suddenly, computers, the internet, smartphones, social media. One foot in the old world, one foot in the new. People who live through that kind of transition often develop a strong internal identity. They don't feel the need to explain every thought or emotion publicly. Their sense of self exists mostly offline. So when life gets difficult, they often deal with it quietly. Not because they're hiding, but because they've never learned to treat their inner world as public information. Someone like this might say, "I don't need everyone to know my business." And to them, that feels completely normal. In fact, it feels respectful to themselves and to others. Sometimes behavior like this gets misunderstood. People assume silence means someone is cold, or distant, or unwilling to open up, but often the story is simpler than that. Sometimes behavior isn't personality. It's a nervous system that learned early that stability comes from handling things internally first. And in many cases, that system worked. It helped people survive economic uncertainty, family changes, a world shifting faster than anyone expected. Quiet coping isn't always suppression. Sometimes it's discipline. And this pattern doesn't just show up during hard times. It shows up in how people handle success, relationships, even conflict. Someone who learned to process things quietly might also keep their victories private, avoid unnecessary drama, help others without announcing it. They often respect competence more than titles. They don't need applause, they just want things to work. This might also explain why many people from Generation X seem calm in crises. They spent childhood figuring things out without supervision. So when chaos appears, their brain switches into problem-solving mode. While others panic, they start fixing things. And interestingly, they often help others while still staying quiet about their own struggles. Of course, no generation fits perfectly into neat boxes. Personality, culture, and family experience all play a role. Some Gen Xers talk openly about emotions. Some younger people process things quietly. Human psychology is rarely that simple, but patterns still exist. And sometimes recognizing those patterns helps us understand people better, including ourselves. So now I'm curious about you. When life gets heavy, which response feels more familiar? Do you tend to talk things through with people around you? Or are you the type who quietly handles things first and only speaks up when it's truly necessary? And if you grew up around Generation X, parents, coworkers, mentors, have you noticed the same pattern? That calm silence that hides a surprising amount of strength. Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring the hidden psychology behind everyday human behavior, consider following the channel for more conversations like this.